Here is the 2022 Rock Machine Blizzard INT e70 297. E70 is just the level of equipment, so it's I think it's the second most expensive model. And 297 is 29er front wheel, 27.5 at the back. So the Rock Machine Blizzard INT is quite an interesting bike. And what sets it apart is, of course, the suspension. The shock, a coil shock, it had us scratching our heads a bit because, well, Rock Machine was stating different names for it. They said it's the Jade X, but looking at the Jade X, it's not. And they said, in the specs, they also said it's the Jade R, which we have never heard of, and it's not listed on the DVO website. But I think it's correct. The DVO Jade R probably is an OEM shock, so it's only sold to the bike manufacturers. And it's basically a Jade, a slightly cheaper version of the Jade. Being this is our first time with DVO shocks and suspension, we had to investigate a bit. On our first ride with this bike, the rear suspension wasn't really performing as well as we were expecting. The rear wheel wasn't really keeping its line in high-speed turns, and it was very active. So we had a closer look at the shock, and it turns out this piggyback thing isn't an oil reservoir. It's a bladder. It's an air chamber, and it's supposed to be set between 170 and 200 psi, and the bike came with like less than 100 psi. So we increased the air pressure, and it really sorted out those issues with the rear end. And the shock, for those of you who know DVO, you might expect the OTT, the over-the-top suspension adjustment. That's not found on this shock. The E3 is sort of the entry-level e-bike specific model in the Diamond lineup, and it's lacking that specific setting. Still, it's a nice fork, it's fairly burly. The stanchion width is 35 millimeters, and of course it's got rebound adjustment. We had to settle for a size medium on the test bike, and that's a tad small for us at just over 180 centimeters. But hey, we often ride size medium and it's usually okay. But this bike only comes in 3 sizes, and they are medium, large and extra large. So yeah, it's no surprise this size medium is on the small side. But when getting on the bike, it didn't feel that small. And yeah, that's down to the geometry. Because Rock Machine claim 74 degrees C-tube angle. But that's measured between these points. So the effective C-tube is actually slacker. So that means when we extend the seat post, we get pushed really far backwards. And so we had to push the saddle as far forward as we could to sort of compensate for this slack C-tube angle. Sitting all the way back here was really bad for climbing. I mean, our bum is not that far off the rear axle. And also, the bike comes with a 40mm stem, which is nice and fine, good for steering. But it adds to the feeling of this bike being fairly compact. So when sitting on the bike initially, the seat was further back and it felt okay, but we had to move it forward, and then our knees got really close to the handlebars. So yeah, size medium is on the small side for us. We definitely should have size large, but oh well, we could still ride it. Wheelbase of this bike is just over 1200 millimeters, which is on the short side for a size medium. Reach 426, yeah, still on the short side. Chainstay length 449 millimeters. And yeah, we thought that was a promising figure for the rear end. So here is the rest of the specs. Let's go through it quickly. We really like the drivetrain. Shimano Diore 10-speed might not sound impressive, but this is the 1146 teeth cassette. So you get the durable drivetrain with all the gears we need for our kind of riding. Motor is the Shimano EP8, which also we quite like for technical trails. It's a really powerful motor when riding slowly, and it's really easy to control on the trails. But if you try pedaling at just below cutoff speed, there are other motors that will give more assistance. Battery, 630 watt hours, and it's a Darphone battery, which is fine by us because it's like 300 grams more lightweight than the comparable Shimano and Bosch batteries. Tires by EMTB, Vigilante up front, 29 by 2.5 inches, and it's the tough/high grip version, so it's a burly casing, fairly heavy tire with nice and soft rubber compound. Rear tire is a 27.5 by 2.6 inches, the WTB Trail Boss. This one too is the tough casing, but it's the fast rolling version. So the rubber compound is a bit harder, and well, the knobs are quite close to each other, so the back wheel can pack up quite easily in muddy conditions. So on the wet trails we rode, it's not my favorite tire, but okay, it's a nice tire and it will work great in lots of conditions. And then for the price. That's the other thing that sets this bike apart, at least here in Norway. The price is 52,990 kroners. And yeah, that's less than the entry-level bikes of pretty much every major brand. And those bikes are 500 watt-hours battery, 630 watt-hours battery, and they are the RockShox 35 Gold forks, and yeah, the bike is cheaper and the suspension is way better. Price in other markets? Yeah, we don't know. It seems to be about 5,500 euros. So check out the price where you live before and compare it to what else is available before deciding. So how does this bike ride then? We took it to the trails, and yeah, with this slack C-tube angle, it's never going to be a climbing specialist. But after pushing the saddle forwards, it climbed quite well. We got up everything in our test loop. And taking it to the flatter trails, I mean, it's 160 mil travel fork, coil shock bike. But it's a quite small bike for us, it was so inspiring on the flat trails. It's a nice pop in the suspension and yeah, agile and fun to ride. So that doesn't sound promising for the descents to it. A nimble bike can't be that stable. And yeah, sure, it's not a confidence-inspiring ride. I'm sure even if we rode a size large bike, it's not going to be as stable and confidence-inspiring as some of the longer, bigger, heavier 29er bikes with like 38mm stanchion forks and so on. Still, we got up to speed, and just going straight line down the mountain, it's not the fastest bike, not the most confident bike, but hitting the turns, doing hard braking, getting up to speed again, yeah, it really was quite a fast bike. Fredrik was on one of those 29er bikes with 38mm stanchion forks and a really long wheelbase. And once we had to do some braking and do some fairly fast turns and then getting up to speed again, and he couldn't keep up. This bike handles so fast, and that helps speed on the descents too. So to sum it up, where we live, this is a very well priced bike. The components, especially the suspension, is way better than pretty much everything else in its price range. Being a coil shock bike, it might look super burly and heavy, but we weighed it in at 24.8 kilos, including pedals, which, yeah, it's a nice weight considering it's got a coil shock. And it's not that aggressive, heavy, all-out downhill bike that it might appear to be. So we think it's a surprisingly all-around bike. Granted, it still shines on the descents. It's not a climbing specialist by any means.